when one of the most famous men on the planet knocked on a stranger's door for the fourth time, and the old man answered and looked up at him and said three words. Shaquille O'Neal sat down on the front steps, not because he was tired, not because he was performing anything for anyone. He sat down because his legs decided, before his mind did, that standing was no longer the right response to what he had just heard. It was a Saturday morning, April 5, 2025, Opa-locka, Florida, 9:17 a.m. The neighborhood was doing what South Florida neighborhoods do on Saturday mornings, slowly, without apology, with the particular warmth that April in Miami carries before the summer heat makes warmth into something oppressive. The street was called Alibaba Avenue, which is a real street, in a real city, in Miami-Dade County, and it had the specific appearance of a neighborhood that was once something and is now something different and is still deciding what it wants to become. The house at the end of the block was small, concrete block construction, the kind that South Florida built by the thousands in the 1950s. White paint that had been white for a long time and was now the specific off-white of things that have survived in salt air for decades without being repainted. A covered front porch with two metal chairs on it, one of which had a cushion and one of which did not. A yard with a single orange tree, old and thick-trunked, producing fruit even now, even in April, the oranges heavy and low. Shaquille O'Neal, 7 feet 1 inch tall, 325 pounds,
These documents are
a
critical.
man whose presence on any residential street in America produces a specific realignment of the visual landscape around him, walked up the front path for the fourth time. He wore a plain black t-shirt and dark pants, no jewelry, nothing that announced anything. He had come, the first 3 times, with his assistant and a foundation envelope. He had come this fourth time alone. He knocked. There was a long pause, the kind of pause that belongs to a man who is 94 years old and moves at the pace the body insists upon after 9 decades of use. The door opened. Clarence Dupree, 94 years old, stood in the doorway. He was small, 5 feet 6 inches in his youth, and now slightly less, the spine having made its adjustments over the years. He wore pressed gray slacks and a white short-sleeved dress shirt, buttoned to the top, in the manner of men of his generation who dress properly for every occasion, including Saturday mornings at home. His hair was white and close-cropped. His face was deeply lined in the specific way of men who have spent decades in the Florida sun. His eyes, behind thin wire-rimmed glasses, were dark and sharp and had not lost anything. He looked up at the enormous man on his porch. He looked at him for a long moment. And then Clarence Dupree said 3 words. "I know why." Shaquille O'Neal sat down on the front steps. The orange tree moved slightly in the April morning breeze. The neighborhood continued around them, slow and warm and indifferent. And everything that happened next was the story of what those 3 words contained. Stay with us through this entire video, because what Clarence Dupree knew, what he had been holding for more than 60 years without telling anyone, is something that will reach into you and rearrange something permanent. And when it comes out, when the connection between a 94-year-old man on Alibaba Avenue and Shaquille O'Neal becomes visible, you will understand why Shaq sat down on those steps, and why, after he did, neither of them spoke for a very long time. Let's go back to the beginning. Not the 4th visit, the first one. Tuesday, February 11th, 2025. Opa-locka, Florida, 2:30 p.m. Shaq's foundation had been doing what it always does, quietly, through channels, without press releases. A community outreach coordinator named Beverly Nash, 44 years old, had been canvassing the older neighborhoods of Miami-Dade County, identifying elderly residents who might need assistance, roof repairs, medical bills, utility arrears, the specific financial vulnerabilities of people who are 90 years old and have outlived the financial plans they made when they were 70. Beverly Nash had found Clarence Dupree through a neighbor. The neighbor had mentioned, carefully, that Mr. Dupree was in his 90s and lived alone and had been alone since his wife passed in 2019 and had refused, twice, assistance from the county's senior services office, which was unusual and might be worth looking into. Beverly Nash had gone to see him. She had explained the foundation. She had left a brochure. She had noted in her report, Mr. Dupree was polite but declined all offered assistance. He said he was fine. He appeared to be fine. House clean, man sharp, no apparent distress. Recommend follow-up. The follow-up had gone the same way. Then Beverly Nash had done something she did not usually do. She had looked at the address. She had looked at the name of the street. She had looked at the name of the neighborhood, Opa-locka, one of the older black communities in Miami-Dade, a neighborhood with a history that most people in Miami know in outline and few know in depth. She had written one additional line in her report. This one might be worth a personal visit. She had sent it to Kevin Okafor. Kevin Okafor had shown it to Shaq. Shaq had read it twice. He had gone the following Tuesday. The first visit lasted 11 minutes. Shaq came with Kevin and a foundation envelope. He introduced himself at the door. Clarence Dupree looked at him the way you look at someone you recognize from television and are making peace with the fact of their actual size. "I know who you are," Clarence said. "Yes, sir," Shaq said. "We have a foundation that—" "I appreciate it," Clarence said. "I'm fine. Mr. Dupree, we'd like to help with any—" "I'm fine," Clarence said again. Not rudely, the way a man says a thing he means completely. He thanked them for coming. He closed the door. The second visit was 2 weeks later, February 25th. Shaq came again, this time with a more specific offer. The foundation had identified that the roof had sections that would need attention before hurricane season, and they would like to arrange for a contractor to assess it, at no cost, with no obligation. Clarence listened to this on his porch, standing with one hand on the doorframe. "The roof is fine," he said. "We'd just like to have someone look." "The roof is fine," he said again. "I've been managing this roof for 50 years. When it needs attention, I'll give it attention." He thanked them again. He went back inside. The third visit was March 15th. Shaq came alone this time. He had decided that bringing people made it feel institutional, and he suspected Clarence Dupree was not a man who responded well to institutions. He knocked. Clarence answered. He looked at Shaq, alone on the porch, and something in his expression shifted. Not warmth exactly, but the acknowledgement of a different approach. They sat on the porch for 22 minutes. Shaq did not mention the foundation. He did not mention money, or roofs, or anything practical. He asked Clarence how long he had lived on Alibaba Avenue. "Since 1961, Clarence said. "That's a long time," Shaq said. "It is," Clarence said. They talked about the neighborhood, about Opa-locka in the 1960s, which Clarence described with the specific precision of a man who had lived through something and remembers it whole, about what the city had been and what it had become, about the orange tree in the yard, which Clarence's wife Estelle had planted in 1963, which had been producing fruit for 62 years and showed no sign of stopping. Shaq listened. He asked good questions. He was in no hurry. At the end of the 22 minutes he asked, as directly as he knew how, "Mr. Dupree, is there anything at all, that I could do for you or arrange for you that you would accept?" Clarence looked at him for a long moment. "No," he said, simply, finally, like a door closing not in dismissal, but in completion. Shaq drove home. He sat in his car in his driveway in Orlando for 14 minutes. He was thinking about the orange tree. He was thinking about something Clarence had said, almost in passing, about Estelle. He had said, "She planted that tree crooked. She knew it was crooked when she planted it. I said, Estelle, that tree is crooked. She said it'll grow straight. It grew straight." He had said it looking at the tree, not at Shaq. He had said it with the expression of a man reviewing evidence of something he has been thinking about for 62 years. Shaq drove back on April 5th, alone. No envelope, no specific offer, no plan. He knocked, the long pause, the door, and the 3 words, "I know why." But to understand what those words meant, what Clarence Dupree had been holding, and for how long, and why he had refused 3 times and said those 3 words on the 4th, you have to go back. You have to go back past the 4 NBA championships, and the MVP, and the business empire, and the PhD, past the military bases, and the 2 small desks, and the moving from city to city, and the mother who held her enormous son facing out on Sunday mornings. You have to go back to Newark, New Jersey, March 6, 1972. Lucille O'Neal, 17 years old, holds a newborn boy, who is already the largest thing in the room. She looks at him and says something private that only they can hear. She decides, in that moment, the form she will give to difficulty, not the breaking kind, the carrying kind. But before Shaq, before Lucille even, you have to go back to a man named Joseph Toney. Joseph Toney was Shaq's biological father. He and Lucille were young, and the relationship did not hold, and he was not part of Shaq's life in the way that a father is supposed to be present. This is not a secret. Shaq has spoken about it over the years, carefully and without bitterness, The way a man speaks about a wound that has fully healed but left a mark. What Shaq did not know, what nobody knew, nobody living, was that in 1962, Joseph Toney had passed through Opa-locka, Florida. He had been 20 years old. He had been traveling from somewhere to somewhere else with no fixed destination and limited resources, in the way that young men sometimes travel in their 20s when they have not yet found the thing that holds them. He had run out of money in Opa-locka. He had been for 3 days, without food or a place to sleep, in a neighborhood that was not his and where he knew no one. A woman named Estelle Dupree had found him sitting on the curb outside her house on Alibaba Avenue. Estelle Dupree, who would plant an orange tree in the yard the following year and who would insist it would grow straight despite going in crooked, had done what Estelle Dupree apparently always did. She had brought him inside. She had fed him for 3 days. She had given him the small back bedroom, the one that faced the orange tree which had not yet been planted. She had fed him and let him sleep, and on the 3rd day had given him bus fare to get to wherever he was trying to go. She had asked for nothing. She had not told him it was a loan. She had not asked his name until the 2nd day, and when he gave it she wrote it in the back of her Bible with the date, because Estelle Dupree was the kind of woman who recorded things, who believed that names and dates were worth keeping. Joseph Toney left on a Tuesday morning in October of 1962. Estelle Dupree watched him go from the front porch. She went back inside. She never mentioned it to anyone. Estelle Dupree passed away in 2019. She was 88 years old. She had been married to Clarence for 61 years. She had been, by every account of everyone who knew her, exactly the person you would expect the woman who fed a stranger for 3 days and gave him bus fare to be. She had kept the Bible. Clarence found the entry after she was gone. Her handwriting, careful and small, in the back of the Bible where she wrote dates and names. Joseph Toney, October 1962. He had not known why she wrote it down. He had assumed it was someone from the church, a name from a prayer list. He had not asked her, because by the time he found it she was no longer there to ask. He had put the Bible on the shelf. He had thought about it sometimes. He had thought about it more when Shaquille O'Neal showed up on his porch with an envelope from a foundation. Because Clarence Dupree had grown up in Opa-locka. He had been 22 years old in 1962. He had been in the house when the young man came in from the curb. He had heard his name, Joseph Toney, and many years later, when Shaquille O'Neal became famous, and someone wrote a long magazine article about his life that mentioned his biological father's name, Clarence Dupree had read that article in the way old men sometimes read articles about famous people, carefully, checking the facts, bringing his own knowledge to bear. He had read the name. He had sat with his newspaper for a long time. He had looked at his wife. He had not said anything. Estelle had died 2 years later without knowing that the young man she had fed in 1962 was the father of one of the most famous athletes in the world. And Clarence had been carrying this for 6 years. Not doing anything with it. Not calling anyone. Not writing letters. Just carrying it the way you carry something you cannot put down and are not sure where to set. When Beverly Nash from the foundation knocked on his door, Clarence had done the math. He had refused. He had refused the 2nd time. He had refused the 3rd time. Because accepting the help of the son of the man his wife had fed in 1962 was something Clarence Dupree needed to think about very carefully. Something that required sitting with. Something that had implications about what help means, and why we give it, and what it costs the giver, and whether the son should know, and whether Estelle would have wanted him to know, and whether knowing would be a gift or a weight or both. He had been thinking about it for 3 months when the large man showed up on his porch for the 4th time, alone. No envelope, no specific offer, and knocked. And Clarence had opened the door and looked up at him and said, "I know why," 3 words. And Shaq had sat down on the steps. Because something in the way the old man said it, the weight of it, the specificity of it, the sense that this was not a greeting but an arrival, had reached past all the other things and done something to his legs. He sat on the steps. Clarence came out and sat in the metal chair with the cushion. The orange tree moved in the April breeze. The neighborhood continued around them. "My wife fed your father," Clarence said. He said it simply, without drama. The way men in their 90s say the important things. Without performance, without build-up, without needing the moment to be more than it is, because they have learned that the things that are real do not need embellishment. Shaq looked at the orange tree. He did not speak. October of 1962, Clarence said. He was young. He had no money and no food. She found him on the curb. She brought him in. 3 days. Shaq was very still. She never told me his name until after. She wrote it in the back of her Bible. I found it after she passed. Clarence paused. I read the article, the one they wrote about you. When you were in the Lakers, they mentioned your father's name. A long silence. Does she have a grave here? Shaq said. His voice was very quiet. Opa-locka Cemetery, Clarence said. On Alexandria Drive. Shaq nodded. He was looking at the orange tree. She said it would grow straight, he said. Clarence looked at him. She told you about the tree. You told me, Shaq said. Last time. You said she planted it crooked, and she said it would grow straight. Clarence looked at the tree. It did, he said. Yes, Shaq said. They sat. The morning continued around them. Neither of them spoke for a long time. What happened next happened quietly, the way everything in this story happened. Shaq did not make a speech. He did not pull out a checkbook. He did not call Kevin Okafor on the spot. He sat on the steps until he was ready to stand, and then he stood, and he looked at Clarence Dupree in the metal chair with the cushion. Will you let me do something? He said. Clarence looked at him. Not for you, Shaq said. For her. Clarence was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the orange tree. He looked at the man standing on his front steps. Yes, he said. What Shaq did in the following 3 weeks, he did through the foundation vehicle, quietly. Through an LLC that held no name that connected to him. Through the specific architecture of anonymous generosity that he had been building and using for years. First, the house on Alibaba Avenue, a full inspection. The roof that Clarence had insisted was fine, was in fact fine. But the electrical panel was original 1950s construction and needed full replacement, something that had not been on anyone's radar and that would have become a fire risk within 2 to 3 years without intervention. The panel was replaced. The permits were pulled in the name of the Property Management LLC. Clarence received a letter explaining that a neighboring property improvement grant had included his address in a block-level electrical modernization program. It was not untrue, exactly. Second, a headstone. Estelle Dupree's grave at Opa-locka Cemetery on Alexandria Drive had a temporary marker, the kind that funeral homes place while families arrange for permanent stones. It had been there for 6 years. The permanent stone was placed on May 2, 2025. Black granite. Her full name, Estelle Marion Dupree. The dates, 1931-2019. Below the dates, at Shaq's specific instruction passed through the foundation, a single line, she fed the hungry and asked for nothing. It was not a direct quote from anything. It was, Shaq told Kevin Okafor when he specified it, what she was. Clarence Dupree saw it on a Sunday morning in early May when his neighbor drove him to the cemetery. He stood at the stone for a long time. His neighbor, who had not known about any of this, stood at a respectful distance. Clarence did not cry. He was not that kind of man. He stood at the stone with his hands clasped behind his back, in the posture of a soldier, which he had been, long ago, before Opa-locka, and the house, and Estelle, and 61 years of mornings in that kitchen. He read the line at the bottom of the stone. He read it twice. He said something very quietly to Estelle. Then he turned and walked back to the neighbor's car. Third, a scholarship. The Estelle Marion Dupree Community Scholarship. Established through the Foundation's educational giving arm. Annual award to one graduating senior from Opa-locka in Miami-Dade County Public Schools, who demonstrates financial need and community service. $4,000 per year. Renewable for 4 years of college. The first recipient was announced in June 2025. Clarence was told about it by Beverly Nash, who came to see him in late May. He sat with this for a while. She would have said it was too much, he said. Beverly Nash looked at him. What would you say? She said. Clarence thought about it. I would say it's right, he said. In June 2025, 2 months after the morning on the front steps, Shaq returned to Alibaba Avenue. This time he was invited. Clarence had called Beverly Nash and said simply that he would like Mr. O'Neal to come by if he had time. Shaq came on a Sunday afternoon. He came alone. They sat on the porch. Clarence brought out 2 glasses of orange juice from the tree in the yard, which he squeezed himself with a method involving a ceramic juicer that he had been using since 1978. The juice was very good, Shaq said so. Estelle's tree, Clarence said. I know, Shaq said. They drank their orange juice. The afternoon was the kind of Miami June afternoon that has not yet committed to being summer but has made its intentions clear. "Can I ask you something?" Shaq said. Clarence looked at him. "Why did you refuse? The first 3 times. You knew. You had already done the math. Why did you keep saying no?" Clarence set his glass down on the small table between the 2 chairs. He looked at the orange tree for a long moment. "Because I wasn't sure you should know," he said. "About your father. About what she did. I wasn't sure it was mine to give." He paused. "Estelle gave him something. She did it because that is who she was, not because of what it would become. Not because of who his son would turn out to be. She would not have wanted you to feel obligated." Shaq looked at him. "I don't feel obligated," he said. Clarence nodded slowly. "I know," he said. "That's why I said yes on the 4th visit." The afternoon held them both. "She planted the tree crooked," Clarence said. "And it grew straight," Shaq said. Clarence picked up his orange juice. "Yes," he said, "it did." In September 2025, the first Estelle Marion Dupree Community Scholarship was awarded to a young woman named Destiny Alcantara, 18 years old, from Opa-locka. She was the first person in her family to attend a 4-year university. She was studying nursing at Florida International University. At the small ceremony, held at a community center in Opa-locka, no press, no cameras, Clarence Dupree sat in the front row. He wore pressed gray slacks and a white dress shirt, buttoned to the top. He had brought the ceramic juicer to leave at the center afterward as a donation to their kitchen. Estelle would have found this sensible. Destiny Alcantara gave a brief speech. She thanked her family, she thanked her teachers. She said that she had never heard of Estelle Marion Dupree before receiving the scholarship, but that she had looked her up and found nothing, which meant that Estelle Marion Dupree had spent her entire life doing good without asking anyone to record it, and that was the person Destiny Alcantara wanted to become. Clarence listened to this with his hands in his lap. He looked at the wall in front of him for a long moment after she finished. Then he nodded once. The specific nod of a man confirming something he has always known. Shaq was not at the ceremony. He was in Orlando. He was working. He had asked Beverly Nash to send him a photograph of the stone on Alexandria Drive, and one photograph of Clarence at the ceremony, if Clarence consented. Clarence consented. The photographs arrived on Shaq's phone on a Sunday afternoon in late September 2025. He looked at them for a long time. The stone. The line at the bottom. "She fed the hungry and asked for nothing." Clarence in the front row, pressed gray slacks, white shirt, hands in his lap, looking at the wall in front of him with the expression of a man who has just heard his wife described accurately by a stranger and has nothing to add. Shaq put his phone face down on the kitchen table. He sat with it for a while. He thought about a young man sitting on a curb in Opa-locka in 1962 with no money and no food. A woman who found him and brought him inside. 3 days of food and a small bedroom facing a yard where an orange tree had not yet been planted. Bus fare. No name asked until the 2nd day. A name written in the back of a Bible with the date. He thought about what it means to do something without knowing what it will become. Without knowing that the young man on your curb will one day be the father of a person who will be known everywhere. Without needing to know that. Without it mattering to what you do next. You bring them in, you feed them, you give them bus fare, you plant a tree crooked, and tell your husband it will grow straight. And 62 years later, it has. Clarence Elias Dupree passed away on March 3, 2026. He was 95 years old. He had been born on March 3, 1931, and he died on his birthday, which is either a coincidence or a statement, depending on how you look at things. He was in his house on Ali Baba Avenue, in his own bed, which is where he had wanted to be, and where, through some specific grace of the body and the circumstance, he was. Beverly Nash called Shaq at 8:14 a.m. He listened. He thanked her. He sat at his kitchen table for a long time. He thought about the orange juice, how cold it had been, how good. He thought about 2 men sitting on a porch on Ali Baba Avenue on a Sunday afternoon in June, drinking orange juice from a ceramic juicer, saying very little, in the presence of a tree that grew straight despite going in crooked. He thought about his stepfather's lesson, the one that came in many forms across many years. Being big means nothing. If you don't stand for something, the size is just size. He thought about Estelle Dupree, who had stood for something so quietly that not even her husband knew the name she had written until after she was gone. He thought about what it means to feed someone. His mother had said it once, in a way he has never forgotten. A woman who feeds people is doing God's work. He sat at the kitchen table, The Florida morning was doing what it does: bright, committed, warm, indifferent to everything except its own brightness. And on Alibaba Avenue in Opa-locka, an orange tree planted crooked in 1963 produced fruit in the warm March air. It had been producing fruit for 62 years. It showed no signs of stopping, because somewhere out there right now, there is a person who did something quietly, not for credit, not because they knew what it would become, not because they could see 62 years down the road to the morning their husband would read an article and do the math, and a very large man would knock on the door 4 times. They did it because someone was on the curb, and they could not walk past. And they had a small back bedroom, and 3 days of food and bus fare, and a Bible with blank pages in the back. That is all they had. That is all it took. Estelle Marion Dupree fed a young man for 3 days in 1962, and wrote his name in the back of her Bible, and planted a tree, and went on with her life. And 62 years later, her name is on a stone in Opa-locka Cemetery that says she fed the hungry and asked for nothing. And a scholarship carries her name to students who will never know she existed, but will be changed by what she did. And a tree grows straight in the yard, on Alibaba Avenue, and the orange juice was very good. That is the whole story. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. We have viewers everywhere this story traveled, from Opa-locka and Orlando and Newark and every city that contains a house with a small back bedroom and a person who could not walk past someone on the curb. We read every comment, every single one. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the Estelles in your life, the ones who fed people and asked for nothing and wrote the names in the back of Bibles that nobody read until after they were gone, please hit the like button right now. 1 second. It helps this reach someone tonight who needs to be reminded that the thing you do quietly, without knowing what it will become, is often the most important thing you will ever do. Because right now, somewhere, there is a person doing something without knowing what it will become, without a camera, without a record, without even a name written down maybe. Just doing it because someone was on the curb, and they could not walk past. This story is for them. If you are new here, welcome, subscribe. Join a community that believes the quiet things, the small back bedrooms, the 3 days of food, the bus fare, the crooked trees planted with certainty, are the things that matter most. Share this with one person today, the one who fed you when you were hungry and asked for nothing, the one whose name deserves to be written down, because that is exactly how it travels. One name, one date, in the back of a Bible, held for 62 years, until a large man knocks on the door for the 4th time and sits down on the steps and finally understands what he is sitting with. Now click on the video on your screen right now, because the next story is something you are absolutely not going to see coming. We will see you there. See you soon. There is something that happens in the weeks between the 3rd visit and the 4th that nobody knows about except Shaq. Between March 15th and April 5th, 2025, Shaq makes 2 trips to Opa-locka that are not visits to Clarence Dupree. The first is on a Thursday evening, March 20th. He drives himself. He parks on Alexandria Drive outside the Opa-locka Cemetery and walks in through the main gate at 6:45 p.m., 20 minutes before closing. He has looked up the location of Estelle Dupree's grave online through the county records, which are public. He finds it in the 2nd section, under a live oak tree. The temporary marker is there, white plastic, the kind that fades in Florida sun. Estelle Marion Dupree, 1931-2019. He stands at the grave for a long time. He does not know yet why he is there. He does not know yet what Clarence knows, or what is in the Bible. He knows only that a 94-year-old man has refused his help 3 times, and said the word fine, in a way that does not mean fine, and that there is an orange tree in the yard that his wife planted, and that when Clarence talked about Estelle he talked about her the way people talk about someone they are still in conversation with. He stands at the temporary marker. He thinks about his mother. He thinks about Lucille, and about the way she used the word fine, which was never the same as the word fine meaning everything is all right. With her it meant, I have assessed the situation and determined that it is manageable, and I will not be discussing it further. He thinks about Estelle Dupree, whom he has never met, who has been dead for 6 years, about whom he knows only that she planted a tree and loved a man for 61 years, and fed people, and kept things in a Bible. He looks at the temporary marker. He makes a decision, not yet knowing what it means, not yet knowing about the Bible or Joseph Tony or 1962, just standing at a grave and deciding that this is not the right marker for this person. He walks back to his car. He sits in the car. He calls Kevin Okafor. "The headstone for Estelle Dupree," he says. "I want to arrange a permanent one." "What would you like on it?" Kevin says. Shaq thinks. He looks out the car window at the cemetery. He does not yet have the words. He does not yet know enough. "I'll tell you later," he says. "Start the process. Black granite. Good quality. I'll have the inscription by the time it's ready." Kevin asks no other questions. This is why Kevin has been doing this for 11 years. The second trip is on a Saturday afternoon, March 29th. He drives through the neighborhood. Not to Clarence's house, through the neighborhood. He wants to understand where Estelle lived, what she saw from her front porch every day for 6 decades. What kind of place this was, and what it meant to choose to stay in it across all the years it was, by some measures, not an easy place to stay. Opa-locka is a city with a complicated history. It was built in the 1920s as a Moorish fantasy, a developer's dream with domed buildings and street names from 1001 Nights, Ali Baba Avenue, Sinbad Avenue, Sesame Street. It attracted residents across the decades and was always a predominantly black community and had its struggles with the specific things that predominantly black communities in South Florida have had to struggle with. Disinvestment, neglect, crime, the ordinary violence of being a place that the people with resources decided was not worth their attention. It also had Estelle Dupree, and Clarence Dupree, and the orange tree, and 61 years of a marriage that held through all of it. Shaq drives slowly down Ali Baba Avenue without stopping. He looks at the house, the white paint, the metal chairs on the porch, the orange tree in the yard, visible from the street, full and heavy with fruit. He keeps driving. He goes home. And 1 week later, on April 5th, he goes back and knocks, and hears 3 words, and sits down on the front steps. The inscription on the stone came to him on a Sunday night in late April, 11 days before it was placed. He was in his kitchen. He was not thinking about it consciously. He was doing something ordinary, making coffee, looking at his phone, the particular domestic normalcy of a Sunday night that has not asked anything specific of him. And then it came. The way things sometimes come when you stop looking for them. She fed the hungry and asked for nothing. He wrote it in his phone notes immediately. 7 words. He read them back. He called Kevin Okafor. "I have the inscription," he said. He read it. Kevin was quiet for a moment. "That's it," Kevin said. "Yes," Shaq said. He put his phone down. He made his coffee. He thought about a woman he had never met. He thought about what it means to live in a way that can be described accurately in 7 words. To have it said about you, after you are gone, without exaggeration, without sentimentality, without needing to add anything. She fed the hungry and asked for nothing. To have that be enough, to have that be everything. Between April 2025 and March 2026, when Clarence died, Shaq visited Ali Baba Avenue 5 more times. Each visit was quiet and unannounced, and lasted between 30 minutes and 2 hours. He brought nothing except himself and, once in November, a specific book he had found, a history of Opa-locka published by a local historian, covering the neighborhood from the 1920s through the present, which he thought Clarence might want to read. Clarence read it in 2 sittings. He called Beverly Nash afterward and said, "Tell Mr. O'Neal that the section on the 1970s is accurate, but the section on the 1990s omits some things." Beverly Nash relayed this to Shaq. Shaq laughed. He called Beverly Nash back and said, "Ask him if he would be willing to talk to the historian." Clarence said yes. In January 2026, he spent 3 afternoons being recorded by the historian. He talked about Opa-locka from 1953 onward. He talked about the neighborhood, the city government, the development pressures, the community organizations, the people he had known. He talked briefly about Estelle. Not about October 1962 specifically, about who she was, what she did. The ceramic juicer, the orange tree. The historian thanked him extensively. Clarence said he was just telling what he knew. In February 2026, 1 month before Clarence died, he and Shaq sat on the front porch together for the last time. The February afternoon was cool by Miami standards, not cold. Just the suggestion of a different temperature. The orange tree had leafed out fully from its winter rest and was beginning to set fruit for the coming season. They drank coffee this time. Clarence made it in a percolator that he had been using since 1981. They talked about several things. about Shaq's businesses, about the scholarship. Destiny Alcantara was completing her first semester of nursing school and had sent a card to the foundation office, which Beverly Nash had photographed and sent to Shaq, who had printed it and brought it for Clarence. Clarence read the card and put it in his shirt pocket. They talked about the neighborhood, about the Moorish dome buildings on the main street, some of which were being renovated, about what Opa-locka had been and what it might become. Near the end of the afternoon, Clarence said something that Shaq has not repeated publicly, but has thought about many times since. He said, "I almost didn't let you in. The fourth time. I almost didn't open the door." Shaq looked at him. "I was tired that morning," Clarence said. "My hip was bothering me. I heard the knock and I thought, I know who that is. I'm too old for this today." He looked at the orange tree. "But Estelle always said, you open the door. Whatever is on the other side of the door, you open it. Because if you don't open the door, you don't find out. And not finding out is always worse." Shaq was quiet. "She opened her door in 1962, Clarence said. "Found your father on the other side of it. She opened it. He picked up his coffee. So I opened it," he said. He drank his coffee. The February afternoon continued. The orange tree stood in the yard, full and patient and entirely itself. Clarence Elias Dupree passed on March 3, 2026. The house on Ali Baba Avenue was bequeathed, per his will, to a grandnephew who lives in Atlanta. The grandnephew flew down to see to things. He spent a week in the house on Ali Baba Avenue, going through 60 years of accumulated life. He found the Bible in the bedroom on the shelf where Clarence had kept it, since Estelle placed it there. He opened it. He found the pages in the back where Estelle had written names and dates across many years. He did not know most of the names. He found a local church archivist who was able to identify some of them as members of Bethany AME Church in Opa-locka, people Estelle had apparently helped in various ways over the decades. Meals, bus fare, a place to sleep, the small bedroom that faced the yard. The grandnephew counted the entries, 47 names, dates spanning from 1958 to 2017, 47 people who had been on some kind of curb, and whom Estelle Dupree had brought inside. He called Beverly Nash, whose number he found in a list of contacts Clarence had kept by the telephone. Beverly Nash called Shaq. Shaq listened. He did not say anything for a long time. He asked one question. "Is Joseph Tony in there?" Beverly Nash asked the grandnephew to check. There was a pause. October 14, 1962, the grandnephew read. "Joseph Tony." Shaq was very still. He thanked Beverly Nash. He put down the phone. He went outside. He stood in his backyard in Orlando, in the early March morning, and he looked at the sky, and he stayed there for a while. 47 names, 47 people brought in from the curb, fed, given the small bedroom, given bus fare, given what she had, sent on their way, not because she knew what they would become, because they were on the curb, and she could not walk past. His mother had told him, "You are not too much, the world is still catching up to you." Estelle Dupree had never met Lucille O'Neal, had never met Shaquille O'Neal, had never known that the young man she fed for 3 days in 1962 would one day have a son who would be known everywhere. She had written his name in the back of her Bible. That was all. That was everything. The Estelle Marion Dupree Community Scholarship continues. The second recipient was named in June 2026. A young man from Opa-locka, named Marcus Antoine, 18 years old, who wants to study civil engineering and build things that last. Destiny Alcantara finished her first year of nursing school with a 3.8 GPA. The orange tree on Ali Baba Avenue is still producing fruit. The grandnephew has decided not to sell the house immediately. He is taking his time. Beverly Nash has suggested, gently, that if the family ever decides to part with it, the foundation might be interested in discussing community uses for the property. The grandnephew said he would think about it. He is a thoughtful person. He found a Bible with 47 names in it and called a stranger to report what he found. Estelle would have liked him. And on Alexandria Drive in Opa-locka, a black granite stone stands under a live oak tree with 7 words at the bottom that are not an exaggeration and are not sentimental and are not more than the truth. She fed the hungry and asked for nothing. 7 words, 47 names. 1 tree planted crooked that grew straight, and 1 enormous man who sat down on the front steps when an old man in a white shirt told him 3 words that contained 62 years. That is the whole story. That is all of it. There is a detail about the third visit, March 15th, the 22 minutes on the porch, that Shaq has not mentioned to anyone but that matters. At the end of the 22 minutes, when Clarence said no for the third time and Shaq was standing to leave, something happened that was small and that Shaq almost didn't register until he was in the car. He had extended his hand to say goodbye. Clarence had taken it. And in the handshake, which was brief, as Clarence was not a man who prolonged physical contact unnecessarily, something happened in Clarence's expression, a flicker, something that lasted less than a second and was not repeated. It looked like recognition. The specific kind that happens when two pieces of information that have been sitting separately in a mind suddenly align. Shaq had thought, in the car, that he had imagined it. He had not imagined it. What had happened, in that flicker, was that Clarence had looked at Shaq's hand, not in the way of someone admiring the size of it, in the way of someone who had seen a hand that size before and was placing where? Joseph Tony's hands. Clarence had always noticed hands. Estelle had teased him about it for decades. He noticed hands the way some people notice eyes, as the most informative surface of a person, the thing that shows the work and the care and the years. Joseph Tony, in 1962, had large hands for a young man, uncommonly large. Clarence had noticed them at dinner on the first night when the young man passed the bread. And he had thought, in the handshake with the enormous man on his porch on March 15th, those hands, that was what the flicker was. That was when Clarence Dupree stopped deciding whether to say anything and started deciding when. He chose April 5th. He chose it because he had been thinking, for 3 weeks, about what Estelle would have done. And Estelle would have opened the door. And Estelle would have said the thing. Not because it was easy or comfortable, but because it was true, and because true things, in Estelle's view, had a right to be said. So he opened the door, and he said the thing. I know why. In the weeks after the fourth visit, Kevin Okafor began quietly researching Joseph Tony. Not at Shaq's request. Shaq had not asked him to. Kevin did it because Kevin has been doing this work for 11 years and knows that when something surfaces from the past, it is usually worth understanding fully. What he found was this. Joseph Tony had died in 1999. He had lived most of his adult life in Louisiana, had worked in the oil industry offshore, had been married twice. He had other children, several of them, with whom Shaq had limited contact over the years. He had been young when he and Lucille separated. He had been, by the accounts of people who knew him, a complicated man, not cruel, not absent from all things, but absent from the specific thing that mattered most, which was the boy. He had spent time in Opa-locka in 1962. This was confirmed by a travel document Kevin found in a Louisiana archive, a bus ticket stub, preserved in a family file that Joseph's daughter from his first marriage had kept. Opa-locka to New Orleans, October 14, 1962. The same date that Estelle had written in her Bible, October 14, 1962. The bus fare she gave him. Kevin put together a document. He did not send it to Shaq without warning. He called first. I found some things about Joseph Tony, he said, about 1962. Do you want to see them? Shaq was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said. He read the document that evening, alone, at his kitchen table, with the specific attention of someone who is reading something that concerns them personally and is determined to read it accurately and not through the distortion of what they want it to mean. He read it twice. He put it down. He thought about a young man on a curb, in Opa-locka, in 1962, 20 years old, going from somewhere to somewhere else, running out of money and food, 3 days into the trip. He thought about what that young man would have become in the years after. The offshore oil work, the 2 marriages, the other children. The specific trajectory of a life that did not include being a father to the boy he had with Lucille. He thought about Estelle Dupree feeding that young man and giving him bus fare. He thought about whether she had changed anything. Whether without those 3 days and that bus fare the trajectory would have been different. Whether he would have made it to Louisiana. Whether the specific life that followed would have happened. He could not know. Nobody could know. But he sat with the possibility. He sat with the fact that a woman he had never met had fed his father for 3 days when his father was 20 years old, and had not yet made the choices that would define him, or fail to define him. She had not known. She could not have known. She had just opened the door. Shaq put the document in the same drawer where he kept the index cards from Walter Simmons, where he kept things that had arrived from somewhere and needed to be near him. He closed the drawer. He went to bed. The Florida night did what Florida nights do. warm and dark, and full of the sounds of things living in it. In the months after Clarence's death, Shaq thinks about two things that seem, on the surface, unrelated, but that he understands to be the same thing. He thinks about the orange tree, planted crooked, growing straight, 62 years of fruit. And he thinks about his mother's voice. "You are not too much. The world is still catching up to you." He is sitting at his kitchen table on a morning in April 2026, 1 year after he sat on the front steps of the house on Alibaba Avenue. He has his coffee. The cardinal that sometimes visits the bird feeder in his backyard is on the feeder, very red, very still, regarding the yard with the focused attention of a creature that takes the business of being alive seriously. He thinks about the 47 names in the back of Estelle Dupree's Bible, 47 people brought in from the curb across 59 years. Not because she knew what they would become, not because she would ever know, because they were on the curb, and she could not walk past. He thinks about his stepfather, Sergeant Philip Harrison, the man who chose to marry Lucille and adopt Shaquille, and did neither thing halfway. Being big means nothing. If you don't stand for something, the size is just size. He thinks about what it means to stand for something, not the loud version, not the announcement version, the Estelle version, the Clarence version. The version where you open the door and feed the person and write the name in the back of the Bible and plant the tree knowing it's crooked and say, "It will grow straight." And then you go inside and you do not mention it to anyone. And it grows straight. The cardinal on the bird feeder shifts its weight. The Florida April morning comes through the kitchen window. Shaq finishes his coffee. He opens his laptop, he begins his day, and on Alibaba Avenue, in Opa-locka, Florida, the orange tree stands in the yard of a house that is still being decided about, still being thought over, still carrying everything it has carried since 1963 when a woman pressed a sapling into soil at an angle her husband said was wrong and told him not to worry. It will grow straight. It did. It does. It will. That is everything. That is the whole story. The front steps and the 3 words and the Bible with 47 names and the tree planted crooked and the stone on Alexandria Drive and the bus fare in 1962 that made it possible for a young man to get where he was going. And 62 years later a very large man sat down on the front steps of the house where the bus fare came from and listened to an old man in a white shirt tell him what his wife had done. And neither of them spoke for a very long time because some things have already said themselves. And the only response that fits is to sit with them, in the April morning, under the orange tree, and let them be what they are. Beverly Nash, 44 years old, has been working with Shaq's foundation for 7 years. She has driven to many houses in many neighborhoods in Miami-Dade County, and knocked on many doors, and been told no in many different ways. She has never been told no the way Clarence Dupree told her no. His no was complete. It was not the no of a proud person who is embarrassed to accept help. It was not the no of someone who has been burned before by organizations that offer things with conditions attached. It was not even the no of someone who doesn't need help. It was the no of someone who is thinking. Beverly Nash had been doing this work long enough to know the difference. She had written recommend follow-up in her report, but what she had actually written, in her personal notebook that she keeps separate from her official reports, was this. This man is deciding something. Give him time. She had given him time. She had passed the file to Kevin Okafor with the note about a personal visit and had not pushed further. After the 4th visit, after Shaq told her what had happened on the steps, in general terms, without the specific details of Joseph Tony, which he kept private, she sat in her car outside her apartment building in Coral Gables for a long time. She thought about the 47 names she would later find in the Bible. She did not know about them yet. She thought about a 94-year-old man who had said no 3 times not because he didn't want help, but because he was deciding whether the story that would come with accepting it was the right story to tell. She thought about the specific dignity of that. She had been to a lot of houses. She had met a lot of people who carried things quietly and had been carrying them for years and were still, at 80 or 85 or 90 or 94, upright and present and thinking clearly and not asking anyone for anything. She thought about what it costs to be that person. She thought about what it means that the work she does, finding those people, making sure someone knows they exist, is not charity in the way that charity is sometimes understood. It is not the transfer of resources from those who have them to those who lack them. It is the act of noticing, of saying, "We see you. We know you are here. We know what you have carried." She went inside. She made dinner. She called her mother. The next morning she drove to work and opened her files and continued. Destiny Alcantara, the first Estelle Marion Dupree scholar, has a photograph on her dorm room wall at Florida International University. It is not a photograph of Estelle Dupree. There are no known photographs of Estelle Dupree aside from one formal church portrait from approximately 1975 that Clarence kept on the mantle and that the grandnephew has taken to Atlanta. It is a photograph that Destiny took herself, on her phone, on the Saturday morning she visited Opa-locka Cemetery for the first time. She had gone because Beverly Nash had mentioned, gently and without pressure, that the scholarship was named for a woman who was buried there, and that the stone was new and the location was on Alexandria Drive, if Destiny was ever in the area and wanted to see it. Destiny drove to Opa-locka on a Saturday morning in October 2025. She found the stone under the live oak tree. She read it. She read it again. She stood there for a long time. She took out her phone. She took a photograph of the stone. Just the stone, in the morning light under the live oak, the black granite, the name, the dates, the 7 words. She sent the photograph to her mother. Her mother sent back one word. Wow. Destiny sent back, I know. She put her phone away. She stood at the stone a while longer. She said, quietly, to Estelle Dupree, I don't know who you were, but I'm going to try. Then she went back to her car and drove back to campus and studied for a nursing exam and got a 91. The photograph has been on her dorm room wall since October. She has not told her roommate who Estelle Dupree was. Her roommate has not asked, but the photograph is there. And every morning when Destiny gets up, she sees it, and she remembers what she said. There is one more thing that Shaq does in the weeks after Clarence's death that nobody knows about except Kevin Okafor. He asks Kevin to look into the other 46 names in Estelle's Bible. Not deeply, not invasively. Just to see if any of them, or their families, can be found and whether any of them are in circumstances where they might benefit from quiet assistance. Kevin reports back 6 weeks later. Of the 47 names, 23 are confirmed deceased. 14 cannot be traced with available information. 6 are living and have been located. They range in age from 61 to 88 and live in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and 1 in New Jersey. 3 of the 6 are in circumstances where some form of assistance might be meaningful. Shaq tells Kevin to proceed. Same vehicle, same anonymity, same approach. He does not tell them why. They receive letters from a trust. No name, no explanation. 2 of them call the phone number on the letter to ask questions. The phone number reaches a foundation representative who explains that a philanthropic trust has made a charitable disbursement and that no further information is available about the source. One of them, an 82-year-old woman in Savannah, Georgia, who Estelle had apparently helped in 1971, when the woman was 28 years old and had 3 young children and had been briefly without a place to stay. One of them writes a letter back to the trust address. The letter is 3 paragraphs. It thanks whoever sent the assistance. It says that she has never forgotten the woman in Florida who helped her in 1971, and that she has spent the intervening years trying to do for others what that woman did for her, and that she hopes this finds whoever sent it in good health. She signs her name, Rosalie Tate, Savannah, Georgia. Kevin scans the letter and sends it to Shaq. Shaq reads it at his kitchen table. He reads it twice. He thinks about Estelle Dupree's 47 names, about Rosalie Tate spending 54 years trying to do for others what Estelle did for her, about the specific, invisible, uncountable ripple of one person opening a door. He puts the letter in the drawer, with the index cards from Walter Simmons, with the other things that belong there. He closes the drawer. He goes to make coffee. Outside in the yard, the Florida April morning is beginning. The bird feeder is full. The cardinal arrives at the exact same time it always does. Some things, if you take care of them, keep coming back. That is what this story is about. Not the famous man and the large gesture. Not the money or the scholarship or the headstone or the electrical panel or any of the practical things that are practical and real and matter. It is about what happens when a woman opens a door in 1958 and does not stop opening it until 2017. 59 years of doors, 47 names. The specific, faithful, uncelebrated practice of seeing someone on the curb and not walking past. And what ripples out from that, invisibly, across 62 years and into a scholarship and a photograph on a dorm room wall, and 6 envelopes sent through a trust to people who did not know why they were receiving them. and into a man who sat on some front steps on a Saturday morning in April and learned something about where he came from that he had not known was there. He sat on those steps, he sat with it, and then he stood up and went to work. The way he always goes to work, quietly, without announcement, toward the person, not toward the record of helping the person. The way his mother moved, the way Estelle Dupree moved, one door at a time. For as long as there are people on the curb, which is always, which is now, which will be tomorrow too. If this story reached you, if it made you think about an Estelle in your own life, someone who opened a door for you when you were on the curb and asked for nothing in return, whose name you may or may not have written down somewhere, please hit the like button right now. 1 second. It costs nothing, and it helps this reach someone tonight who is sitting with something heavy and needs to be reminded that what you do quietly, without knowing what it will become, matters more than you will ever see. Because right now, somewhere, there is someone on a curb. And somewhere very close to them, there is a door. And behind the door, there is someone deciding. This story is for the person behind the door. Open it. You do not need to know what happens next. Estelle Dupree did not know. She opened the door anyway. And the tree grew straight. If you are new here, welcome. Subscribe and join a community that believes the quiet things, the open doors, the small back bedrooms, the bus fare, the 7 words on a stone, are the most important things. Share this with one person today. The one whose door was open when yours was closed. The one who wrote your name in the back of something. Because that is how it travels. One door, one name, one orange tree planted slightly crooked in a yard on Alibaba Avenue in 1963, growing straight ever since. Click on the video on your screen right now because the next story is something you are not going to see coming. We will see you there. There is something specific about the house on Alibaba Avenue that Shaq noticed on his second private visit, on March 29th, when he drove slowly through the neighborhood without stopping. The orange tree in the yard was visible from the street. Not fully. There was a low concrete wall around the front of the property, the kind that was standard in South Florida construction of that era. But the top of the tree was visible above the wall, and it was full, and the fruit was visible, orange against the green of the leaves, in the late March afternoon light. What he noticed was that the tree leaned, not dramatically, not the lean of something damaged or unhealthy, the lean of something that started at an angle and grew upward from that angle. If you knew what you were looking for, if Clarence had not told him, in the third visit, that it was planted crooked, you might not notice it at all. But if you knew, you could see it. The trunk was straight now. 6 feet up it was entirely straight. But at the base, at the point where it entered the soil, there was a slight deviation, a place where the original direction had been corrected. Not by Clarence, not by time alone, by the tree itself. The tree had done the correcting, had grown toward the light, toward the vertical, toward what it was supposed to be. The soil had gone in crooked and the tree had decided that was not the permanent direction. Shaq sat in his car outside the property on Alibaba Avenue on March 29th and looked at the top of the orange tree above the low concrete wall. He thought about what Clarence had said. She said it'll grow straight. He thought about what it means to know that something will grow straight even when it goes in wrong. Not because you can guarantee it, not because the physics of it are certain, because you know the nature of it, because you understand what it is trying to become. He thought about his mother, about the specific confidence she had always carried about him. Not the confidence of someone who was certain of outcomes. The confidence of someone who understood his nature, who knew what he was trying to become. Who saw that even when things went in at a wrong angle, the direction was right. You are not too much. The world is still catching up to you. He drove home. He did not tell anyone about the drive. Not Kevin, not his assistant, not anyone. Some things you keep for yourself. Some observations belong only to the person who made them. He kept that one. The Estelle Marion Dupree Community Scholarship has a selection committee of 3 people. Beverly Nash sits on it. A retired teacher from Opa-locka named Geraldine Ford, 71 years old, sits on it. A community organizer named Damian Cole, 39 years old, who has been doing civic work in Opa-locka for 15 years, sits on it. They meet in February each year to review applications. The scholarship application asks 3 questions, in addition to the standard biographical and financial information. The 3 questions are, who in your life opened a door for you when you needed it? What have you done with that? What do you intend to do with what comes next? Beverly Nash wrote the questions. She wrote them on a Sunday afternoon in August 2025, at her kitchen table, thinking about Estelle Dupree and Clarence and the 47 names and the way that help travels. Not in a straight line, not from one person to another in a clean transfer, but in a crooked line that grows straight over time. She wrote the questions and sent them to Kevin Okafor. He sent them to Shaq. Shaq read them. He wrote back one sentence. These are right. Destiny Alcantara's answer to the first question was, my grandmother. She wrote that her grandmother had raised her for 3 years when Destiny's mother was going through something hard, and that during those 3 years her grandmother had told her every day that she was going to be someone who helped people, not because life would be easy but because life had taught her what it felt like to need help, and that knowledge was a responsibility. She wrote that she wanted to be a nurse because nurses are the people who stay, not the doctors who come and go, the nurses who stay. Geraldine Ford, reading this application, had put it down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. She had picked it up and continued. The committee gave Destiny the scholarship unanimously. In November 2025, Destiny Alcantara has her first clinical rotation at Jackson Memorial Hospital in Miami. She is assigned to a medical surgical floor. She works under the supervision of a charge nurse named Marcus, who is 45 years old and has been a nurse for 19 years and is, by universal agreement of every student who has ever rotated through his floor, the best teacher they have ever had. On her first day, he tells her 3 things. He tells her, the chart tells you what the body is doing. The patient tells you who they are. You need both. He tells her, in this work you will see things that will try to harden you. Don't let them. Hardness is not competence. Competence with softness is the rarest thing in this building. He tells her, when someone is scared, the most important thing you can do is stay in the room, not doing anything necessarily. Just stay. Destiny writes these things in her notebook. She thinks about the stone in Opa-locka cemetery. She thinks about the 7 words. She thinks about what it means to stay. She stays. At the end of her first rotation, Marcus tells her she is going to be excellent. She does not tell him about the scholarship or the stone or the photograph on her dorm room wall. She says thank you. She goes back to campus. She studies. The photograph is on the wall when she arrives. It is still there when she goes to sleep. 7 words. Black granite. Live oak tree. Morning light. The thing about doors is that they only work in one direction at the time of opening. You open a door and you let something in. You don't know yet what it will do when it gets inside. You don't know what it will become. You only know that it was outside, and now it's in. Estelle Dupree opened her door on a day in 1958 and did not stop opening it for 59 years. She opened it in 1962 and let in a young man named Joseph Tony, who was 20 years old and had no food and no money and was going from somewhere to somewhere else on a road that led, eventually, to a son who would be known everywhere. She did not know that. She knew only that he was outside. And she opened the door. Clarence Dupree opened the door on April 5, 2025. After 3 months of deciding, after 3 previous refusals, after standing in his kitchen on a Saturday morning with a hip that was bothering him and thinking, I'm too old for this today. But Estelle had always said, you open the door. So he opened it. And Shaq sat down on the front steps, and the orange tree moved in the April breeze. And 62 years of something finally became visible. Not because it was announced, not because anyone was looking for it, because a door was opened, and someone came through. That is the whole story. Front steps, 3 words, orange tree, 47 names, 7 words on black granite, 1 scholarship, 1 photograph on a dorm room wall, 1 woman in Savannah, Georgia, who has spent 54 years trying to do what Estelle did for her. 1 very large man who sat down when his legs decided that standing was not the right response, and got back up and went to work. The way he always does, quietly, toward the person, not toward the record of it, toward the door, and through. 1 last thing. It is small, and it happened quietly, and it belongs in this story. On March 6, 2026, Shaq's birthday, 3 days after Clarence died, Shaq drives to Opa-locka. He does not tell anyone he is going. He drives himself. He takes I-95 south from Orlando, and then the turnpike, and then the surface streets into Miami-Dade, the specific sequence of roads that South Florida requires, the roads that change character as you move through the county, from the highway infrastructure to the neighborhood streets, to the specific blocks of Opa-locka with their Moorish street names and their particular light and their particular feel. He parks on Alexandria Drive. He walks into the cemetery. He finds the stone. Black granite. Live oak tree. Morning light. It is 9:30 a.m., The light is doing what Florida light does at this hour, coming in at an angle through the oak leaves, laying down on the stone in patches. He stands at the stone. He reads the 7 words. She fed the hungry and asked for nothing. He reads them the way he always reads them when he comes here, which is not the first time he has stood at this stone since it was placed. He reads them as both statement and instruction, as both fact and imperative, as both what she was and what it is possible to be. He stands at the stone for a long time. He thinks about Clarence, about gray slacks and white shirts, about ceramic juicers and percolators and orange juice from a tree that was planted crooked and grew straight, about a man who opened a door on a Saturday morning because his wife had always said, "You open the door." He thinks about Joseph Tony, 20 years old on a curb in 1962, the bus fare to Louisiana, the specific trajectory of a life that did not include being a father to the boy, the son who sat on the front steps of the house that gave him the bus fare 62 years later and learned all of this at once. He thinks about Lucille, about March 6, 1972, the day she held her enormous son in a hospital in Newark and said something private that only they could hear. It is his birthday. He is standing at the grave of a woman he never met. He is 54 years old. He says something very quietly to Estelle Dupree. He says thank you, not for what she did for his father, not for the bus fare or the 3 days or the small bedroom, for what she showed him about what it is possible to be, for the 47 names, for the door. He stands there a while longer. Then he walks back to his car. He drives back through Opa-locka. He drives past Alibaba Avenue. He does not stop. He looks at the yard of the house as he passes. The orange tree is there, full and green and heavy with fruit in the early spring, growing straight. He drives north. He has a meeting in Orlando at 2 p.m. He is going to be on time. The Florida morning is doing what it does, bright and warm and entirely committed to itself, and not particularly concerned with birthdays or gravestones or orange trees or the specific weight of 62 years coming clear on a porch in April. It is just morning, being morning, the way it always is, and the roads go north, and the orange tree grows, and the 47 names are in a Bible in a house in Atlanta waiting to be understood, and a scholarship gives someone a room and a path, and 3 questions that ask, who opened a door for you? What have you done with that? What do you intend to do next? And somewhere in a dorm room at Florida International University, a photograph hangs on a wall and says 7 words every morning to a girl who is going to be a nurse, because nurses are the people who stay. And a large man drives north on I-95 on his birthday, thinking about a woman who fed the hungry and asked for nothing, and the world continues. And the door is still there, and someone is about to open it. That is the story, all of it, from the first knock to the last drive north, from the curb in 1962 to the stone in 2025 to the birthday morning in 2026. 3 visits that said no. 1 morning that said I know why. 1 sentence that cost everything to say and gave everything by being said. And a very large man who sat down on some front steps when his legs understood something his mind was still arriving at, and got back up and opened the next door. We will see you in the next story. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. We have viewers from Opa-locka and Orlando and Newark and Atlanta and Savannah and everywhere this story traveled. From places where someone opened a door for you when you were on the curb. From places where you are the one with the door and have not yet decided to open it. From places where a tree is growing straight that went in crooked and nobody remembers how it started. We read every comment, every single one, and we love knowing where this community is reaching. If this story moved you, if it made you think about a name you should write down somewhere, a door you should open, a person you have been meaning to call, please hit the like button right now, 1 second. It helps this reach someone tonight who needs to hear that what you do quietly, without knowing what it will become, is the most important thing you will ever do. Because right now, somewhere, there is someone on a curb, and a door that could open, and a person behind it who is deciding. Open it. You don't need to know what happens next. Estelle Dupree didn't know. She opened it 47 times, and every single time something grew straight. If you are new here, welcome. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Join a community that believes the quiet things are the most important things. That 7 words on black granite can be a complete life. That 1 door opened in 1958 can still be changing things in 2026. Share this with 1 person today. The one who opened a door for you. The one whose name you should write down. 1 door. one name, one orange tree. That is all it takes. That is everything. Click on the video on your screen right now, because the next story is something you are absolutely not going to see coming. We will see you there. See you soon. Geraldine Ford, 71 years old, who sits on the Estelle Marion Dupree Scholarship Committee, taught 4th grade at Opa-locka Elementary School for 28 years. She retired in 2018. She knew Estelle Dupree from church, though not well. They were not close friends, simply women who occupied the same pews for decades, and nodded to each other and occasionally sat together at the annual church dinner. When Beverly Nash asked her to join the committee, she had accepted immediately. She had not been told the full story behind the scholarship. Not the Joseph Tony part, not the Shaq connection, beyond the fact that the foundation was connected to his giving program. She knew only that the scholarship was named for Estelle Dupree, and that it went to students from Opa-locka who could answer 3 questions. She read every application carefully. On the morning of the committee's first meeting, she brought something, a small object, a brass lapel pin in the shape of an open door, which she had bought at a craft fair many years ago and had worn occasionally when she wanted to remind herself of something. She placed it on the table at the start of the meeting. Beverly Nash looked at it. "Estelle used to say that," Geraldine said. "You open the door. Whatever's on the other side, you open the door." Beverly Nash looked at her. "You knew her well," Beverly said. Geraldine thought about it. "I knew who she was," she said, "in the way you know someone from church. 30 years of Sunday mornings." She paused. "She was the kind of person you knew without having to know, if you understand me. You could tell what kind of person she was without being told." Beverly Nash nodded. She thought about the 47 names. She thought about the bus fare. She thought about a man on a curb in 1962. She did not say any of this. "I think that's the right thing for the table," Beverly said, looking at the pin. Geraldine left it there for the rest of the meeting, and at every meeting after that. An open door on a table in Opa-locka, Florida. Not going anywhere, waiting for the next application. Waiting for the next person who can answer the question. Who opened a door for you? What have you done with that? What do you intend to do next? Those are not 3 questions. They are one question asked 3 times. Because the answer to all 3 is the same. You open the door. Whatever is on the other side, you open it. That is the story of Estelle Dupree and Clarence Dupree, and the man who knocked 4 times and sat down on the steps on the 4th, and the tree planted crooked in 1963 that has been growing straight every year since, and will keep growing, as long as the door keeps opening, which is to say, always.